Welcome, everyone. My name is Haley Soifer, and as the CEO of the Jewish Democratic Council of America, I want to thank you for joining our sixth consecutive JDCA community convening on the crisis in Israel. When Israel was attacked by Hamas on October 7th, we committed to holding weekly briefings as a way for our community, our organization, our supporters, our members, and our volunteers to come together, to support each other, and to stay up to date on what is happening in Israel and within the Jewish community here in the United States. Our speakers have included Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries, New York Governor Kathy Hochul, and Representatives Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Kathy Manning, just to name a few. And we thank the thousands of you who have tuned in and remained engaged every week. This week, our briefing is going to be a little bit different. We are going to hear from members of JDCA's leadership, including our new Leaders Council, and all of you to share reflections on yesterday's remarkable and historic March for Israel in Washington in support of Israel, against anti-Semitism, and a call for the immediate release of hostages. With 290,000 people yesterday, it was the largest rally organized by Jewish Americans in history, surpassing the 250,000 who marched in 1987 for the release of Soviet Jewry. As someone who was bussed in myself from New York with my parents to march for the release of Soviet Jews 36 years ago, I brought my son yesterday to march for the release of hostages, and it was meaningful to make history for a second time with so many of you. Let's hope it has the same impact. Whether you were there yesterday or not, we want to hear from you. And I'll be uplifting your reflections and taking questions, so please post them in the chat. Yes, our chat is open today, and we'll talk also about what all of you can do and share our newest call to action regarding the hostages, demanding their release. We'll post that in the chat. I will now invite JDCA board member and programming chair, Susie Stern, to share her reflections on the rally first. Susie.
Thank you, Haley. I know we all just shared an exhilarating day yesterday, whether you were there or watched it on the live stream. It was remarkable. So I'm supposed to give reflections on the March for Israel. Well, the march was not really a march. It was a gathering of, I say, 300,000 Jews and non-Jews at the mall of the Capitol. But it really was a march because it began with a lineup of buses on the highway marching to Washington. Buses as far as the eye could see. Then we got to the metro station, and the march continued with thousands and thousands and thousands of kids in blue and white and adults wrapped in Israeli flags singing as they walked to the metro station. A virtual sea of blue and white. At the metro station, going up the escalator, again, masses of blue and white like a flowing river going up and down. And the march continued into the metro, where we all packed into the cars, a little too tight for me, but the singing began. Incredible singing, jumping up and down kind of singing, and seeing the wonderful hats and headgear and flags and placards everybody had. It was just a gorgeous sight. And then when we got out of the metro station to the mall, then that river and sea of blue all flowed into a true ocean of people as far as we could see. People from all walks of life. There were really people with MAGA hats on, and there were people with LGBTQ hats, and Christians for Israel, and everything in between. But what I noticed with the young people, families, teens, I don't think any other issue could draw such a crowd. The organizers of the event, I know because I'm a part of JFNA, had three goals in mind: to bring the wider community out in support of Israel and thanking this administration for its unwavering support of Israel, to highlight the fight we must have against anti-Semitism with its dramatic increase. I saw this morning 900% increase. And finally, to highlight the plight of the hostages and the need for their immediate release. I'm going to give you three highlights of the program. One was when the House and Senate leadership locking arms saying, "Am Israel High." I know it's preordained a little bit, but I thank Chuck Schumer, who I could hear in the background saying, "Let's lock arms and say Am Israel High." And it was an amazing thing to say. And this is one issue where we all agree. Number two highlight for me was Ambassador Deborah Lipset, who spoke on behalf of the administration. She is, as you all know, the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, and who has been my friend for over 30 years. So watching her take on this leadership for the world has been profoundly moving. Yesterday, she rose magnificently to give all 300,000 and the millions watching a masterclass on anti-Semitism. She began with speaking about George Washington 230 years ago, reassuring the Jews of Newport that our new nation would give bigotry no sanction and persecution no assistance. Anti-Semitism, Deborah Lipstick defines as Jew hatred. It has permeated our countries, our culture, our faith, and too many campuses. She reminded us when Jews peacefully protesting are physically, verbally intimidated, when Jewish children are harassed, when protesters chant "gas the Jews," when Jewish stars are painted on buildings housing Jews, that's not expressing support for the Palestinian rights. That is Jew hatred, pure and simple. And her message when all these things happen, do not cower, allow no one to make you afraid. Well, I think we all needed to hear those words. The thunderous cheering helped us all process the emotions we've all been experiencing and empowered us to let no one make us afraid. Our group was surrounded by young people who were cheering the loudest. I think it was a release because I think that was the message they needed to hear as they navigate the difficult situation that they find on college campuses. And my number 3 highlight was Rachel Golden Poland, mother of hostage Hertz Goldberg Poland. And I've heard her in person 3 times recently, but yesterday she brought us all to tears when she spoke about the plight of the families and their loved ones held hostage. She described the families, we have 3rd-degree burns on our souls, our hearts are bruised and seeping with misery. But she spoke of her son and all the hostages. Those are the real souls. And they want to ask the word, and I quoted this, I took her directly. All the screamers, the indifferent, the experts, the academics, the knowledgeable, the passives, the perfectly outraged, the indignant, the haters, the leaders, the lovers, every single one of us. Why is the world accepting that 240 human beings from 30 countries have been stolen and buried alive? That was the first time I'd seen that image. And she talked about the little 3-year-old Abigail Edan, who saw her parents murdered and then was kidnapped. And she said, I would have you ask on Emily's behalf, on Abigail's behalf, why are you letting me stay in my trauma buried in the earth's crust? I learned from that we all have to answer the question, what are we going to do to help these hostages? And Rachel challenged each one of us to ask ourselves what we're going to do, what we need to start thinking about today, tomorrow, and every day until they are released. And she finished, what will be your excuse? I know we've been asked by the hostage families to contact members of Congress on a daily basis to ask them not to forget the hostages and ask them what they are doing. Well, we owe it to Hirsch and to Abigail and all the others to say Hineni. I'm going to close where actually Haley began, from 1987, the March for Soviet Jewry. We told our children then, ages 4 and 7, in detail, we were going to the head of Russia, Mr. Gorbachev, and asked him to let the Jewish people be free so that they could practice Judaism, they could have Hanukkah, they could have Shabbat. And we decided not to take them just because they were pretty little, and but that we really sort of pounded in why we were going. And when we returned, we opened the door to our house, and our 4-year-old son, in his little Dr. Denton pajamas, greeted us with, well, Mommy, did he let them out? He truly thought that Mommy and Daddy had the power to change the world with our voices. And guess what? We did. And let us pray that our asking for the release of these hostages will have the same impact that we did in 1987 with the opening up of the Soviet Union. It is a profound time in all of our lives, and we have our voices and we must use our voices. And yesterday was an extraordinary day, and I want to introduce you now to my colleague and friend, Jill Goldenberger, who is the vice chair of the programming committee and a board member.
So yesterday, among 290,000 people, for the first time in 6 weeks, I didn't feel alone. It was an astonishing experience to be amidst the incredible array of Jews and supporters of Israel, bipartisan. I'm a very partisan person. It was pretty impressive to see the bipartisanship. I don't think there's any other issue in the entire country that unifies and that people agree on across the spectrum. Most people agree on. And what we found yesterday was the solidarity that I think so many of us had been missing and seeking. It was such an extraordinary experience to be amidst the entire crowd. But I think it's also important to recognize that over 250,000 people watched online. We are a global movement. And it is really critical for us to recognize that we do not stand alone. When I looked at the entire array of Amcha, of our people across the entire spectrum, recognizing that we all support the need to rid the world of terrorism, of Hamas. We as Jews are leading the fight for freedom. That was one of my key takeaways from yesterday. I also want to quote the CEO of Boston's Federation, CJP, Mark Baker, who said a couple weeks ago at an event that you don't build the firehouse while the house is on fire. And I want to mention the power of organizing, because nobody brings together that many people and accesses the kind of bipartisanship that we were able to witness, and the support that we were able to gather without organizing, which is what JDCA does. We organize, we mobilize, we actually activate people to get out and support the values of Jewish Democrats. And the values that we support are freedom and democracy. I encourage you all to get involved in JDCA. I am so honored to be part of this organization, and I hope you will join in the fight. And I'm going to close very briefly with some wonderful adjectives that I've been soliciting from a number of people about how they felt about yesterday. And I think they just encapsulate such a wonderful way of describing where yesterday before the rally, I didn't have hope. I have hope. We are resolute. We are determined. We have grit. We are proud. And I am so proud to turn this over to my dear friend who I've known my entire life, Beth Keeper-Leonard, who is the treasurer of JDCA. Go ahead, Beth.
Thanks, Jill. I echo what Susie and Jill have both said. It was an impactful, powerful, meaningful day. If you watched it online, if you can go watch it online from some other media, do it. The power of the people, the coming together, that 290,000, I know that's going to have to be verified somewhere, but the 290,000 people that were unafraid to stand up for Jewish people around the world, to fight anti-Semitism, and to be part of something that is so much greater than what we've been doing the last 7 weeks or 6 weeks. It was, you know so many people that were there, and yet I have to see Susie and Jill on the screen to know that they were there. But the truth of the matter is we were all together. And I think the most important thing for me was to not be afraid. And so it was the first time, I would say, in this many weeks that I came in a public arena. And even though there was, we had incredible support from the police and the National Guard and everybody. And I thanked all of them, because I know that this had to be one of the highest security issues. And so that was amazing to see the support, and to see the support of our allies, which we have heard it's been deafening the last few weeks. I wanted to say that all the speakers were incredibly impactful. Rachel, for sure, was beyond meaningful. But honestly, to see, I will echo what Jill said about the bipartisanship. The 4 leaders of the House and Senate come together and be committed in what they said and how they've been acting really was powerful. Lastly, I just want to speak a little bit about President Herzog. And I think all of you know that he has been an incredible advocate for Jews all over the world, and believes that that his job is the president of the Jewish people, not only for the people of Israel. He could not be more places. He could not be more committed. He is incredibly knowledgeable about North American Jewry, for sure, but he's really committed to how he can bring us all together. What I believe, gave to all of them was that they know they're not alone too. I think the magnitude of who turned out and how many was so important for our Israeli brothers and sisters to really feel that we are Am Echad. And I just want to give a quote from what President Herzog said at the end, because it really was important. He said, to march for the babies, the boys and girls, women and men viciously held hostage by Hamas, to march for the right of every Jew to live proudly and safely in America, in Israel, and around the world. And above all, we come together to march for good over evil, for human morality over bloodthirst. And I think it couldn't have been said any better. So thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Adam Rosen, and we'll get this. I think we'll be able to answer all your comments and questions shortly.
Thanks, Beth. Pleasure to see you all today. My name's Adam Rosen. I'm the vice chair of the New Leaders Council for JDCA. I'm also the Ohio chapter leader in the Midwest, and I'm back home in sunny, beautiful Cleveland after a really inspiring time in Washington yesterday. I had the privilege to attend the rally yesterday with so many friends and family and people that I haven't seen over many, many years. It felt like a family reunion. And it started by joining with my brothers and sisters from Cleveland early in the morning. They had traveled on bus. Over close to 2,000 people came on bus from Cleveland, Ohio, and over 25 buses. Yesterday, we walked from the Kennedy Center in like a line together, all chanting and singing, traveling across the mall to the rally site. And right from the get-go, you could tell that the day was going to be a special day, a day where children that were marching alongside us, that grandparents were multi-generational families were marching together, that these were going to be memories that are going to last for a lifetime and for years to come. I mean, there was a portrait in my house, as Haley mentioned, of the Soviet rally, 36 years ago now. And that was something that my parents talked to me about growing up, and how important it was for Jews and non-Jews alike to show up in solidarity when the world was turning against them. And that's exactly what I got to experience yesterday, a family reunion, a coming together. And the speakers and the atmosphere were also inspiring. I saw folks, like I said, from all the different walks of life that we get to participate in, my JDCA family, federations, people that I grew up with or went to camp with or did Maccabi games with, all those various walks of life and Jewish life all coming together for one cause yesterday. My favorite remarks yesterday came from Hakeem Jeffries, who is so eloquent at telling the story of the Jewish people. He represents so many different types of Jewish people in his district in New York, and is so great at recounting the history and plights of the Jewish people, and why it's so important to stand shoulder to shoulder with us as we combat anti-Semitism, as we call for the return of the hostages, and as we support Israel in such a difficult time. And then at the end of the rally, walking out to see all the support from regular people in Washington, people who just were, going about their day to express, solidarity with us, or to give us a thumbs up, or, to just be so welcoming in a place where, a lot of people did express concern for safety and all those things. It never once felt unsafe or anything like that. It was really a remarkable time to be with our Jewish family, to be with the Jewish people, and to express our support for Israel. And in the minutes and hours and now days since being there, the outpouring of support from friends through Instagram or social media, or who people have reached out to me to say, thank you for taking time out of your day to go and do what you did. And it's Jews and non-Jews alike that have reached out and expressed that support. And it's really so meaningful. And I think that level of hope, the amount of hope that we got from yesterday, is what's going to carry us through a really difficult time. We've all been struggling, having conversations and talking, and this is where we really, I think, can have some momentum going forward to be able to carry through. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to our CEO, Haley, and she'll take it from there. Haley?
Great. And thank you so much to all of you for sharing your reflections and your questions. We've gotten a wide range of thoughts from all of you about both the march and what comes next. I want to start by speaking briefly about what comes next. I was particularly inspired by Rachel Goldberg, who spoke yesterday. Now, many of us have heard from her. She and her husband have been advocating for the release of their son, Hirsch Goldberg Poland. And I want to repeat her words. She said, why is the world accepting that 240 human beings from almost 30 countries have been stolen and buried alive? She said, what the world needs to start thinking about today is, what will your excuse be if we do nothing? And with that, I want us to consider that a call to action. We can all do something demanding the release of the hostages. JDCA put a call to action out today to call your representatives to keep this at the top of their agenda. And we've heard from members of Congress that are getting these calls. It makes a difference for them to know this is the #1 issue that they're hearing about from their constituents. So please keep those calls and those letters coming. And now I'm going to turn it over to one of our new leader council members, Daniel Silverberg, who is friends with the Goldberg Polans, to talk more about not just Hirsch, but the 240 hostages and what we can all do to demand their release. Daniel.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be seeing you after a powerful day. I'm sorry to be seeing you under these circumstances. A brief background about myself. I knew John and Rachel from our time living in the Berkeley Jewish community together and have stayed in touch. I can send you all pictures of Hirsch and the Goldberg Poland family visiting me in the U.S. Capitol when I worked for Steny Hoyer as his national security advisor, which I did in.
Did we lose Daniel? Okay, it looks like we accidentally lost Daniel. Didn't seem like he had the best service. So while we wait to get Daniel back, which we will, I'm going to comment on some of the questions and the comments that all of you have been putting in the Daniel, do we have you?
Can you hear me okay, Haley?
We hear you now. Yes, we lost you for a bit
Okay.
while you're in search
Sorry.
of good service.
Yeah.
I'm going to address a question that has come in from multiple people. This is not about the hostages, but it's about the event yesterday. We got a lot of questions in the chat about why Pastor Hagee spoke. And I just want to say, I don't actually have the answer to that. The rally itself was organized by the Conference of Presidents and JFNA. So these are national umbrella organizations that represent many Jewish organizations in addition to all the federations across the country. They made the decisions about the speakers. But for those of you who didn't agree with one of the speakers or two of the speakers, I will just say, as a proud Democrat and as a Jew, I was surprised also to see him there. I was surprised, but in the same way that we were there for every minute of this rally and this march, even when Speaker Johnson spoke or someone that you may not agree with in every moment, being there together, all 290,000 of us, making history together, it felt in that moment like it superseded those divides and whatever disagreements might exist with the speakers, with partisanship. It really felt like a moment of unity. So we are focused on that. So I don't have the answer. JDCA did not finalize that lineup of speakers, but we were just thrilled to be there and to make history with all of you. Daniel, are you able now to speak? Okay, let's see.
Can you hear me now okay?
Yes. Okay, great.
Okay, terrific. My apologies. In short, what I said was I came at this from my relationship with John and Rachel Poland. And I have pictures of Hirsch in the Capitol from 2015 when he visited me when I was working for Steny Hoyer at the time. And I mention that because there are essentially two groups of hostage families that are working together. And my role here is I am volunteering with one of them to help coordinate DC efforts. You have the broader 200 plus families that includes the Israelis and the Americans. And then you have a separate smaller group of just the 10 US families. These are the families who have relatives that are US citizens that are being held hostage in Gaza. And I stress that because I think that the working assumption here is by putting a lot of muscle into getting those US families in front of their representatives and in front of Jake Sullivan and the White House, that it will lift everyone's fortunes. And so it's really important when we talk about the hostage issue to raise those kinds of pictures I mentioned of Hirsch in the Capitol, that we're not talking about a foreign country or even a close ally like Israel. We're talking about US citizens. And no question, I think what has been animating the families is the sense of, if you had 10 US citizens detained in any other context, put aside that you would have Delta Force planning all kinds of military operations, you would have tremendous diplomatic pressure being brought to bear. And I think that there's a sense of bewilderment on the part of the families, not so much about the Biden administration, which they think has been wildly supportive, and Congress for the most part, but generally among the US public, of why is there not this outcry, as Haley just mentioned with Rachel Goldberg, saying, you have 10 of our citizens being held under terrible circumstances. Forget how you feel about the Israel-Palestine crisis. We have to get these people back. So in terms of practical next steps, one, Haley is 100% right. I think the JDCA call to action is critical. Call on your members to pass House Resolution 793, which calls for the release of all hostages, including US hostages. But equally important, press your members to keep this top of mind, to keep speaking on the House floor about this, to make clear to US partners, this isn't just a Jewish community issue. It's not a discrete, pro-Israel issue. It's a US national security issue to get these hostages released. So one, that specific call to action. Two, the greatest fear among the families is that with the next crisis that happens, their loved ones are going to be forgotten. And with God's help, there will be a reduction in the violence in Gaza, and people are just going to forget that the hostages remain in Gaza. So the number two thing that people can do, in addition to making sure members of Congress stay plugged in on this, it's what can you do to keep this in the media? What other groups can you be collaborating with to make sure that they are hosting events with hostage families when they're coming to the US? What can we do as plugged in, politically active Jews to make sure that every candidate on the campaign trail has this as a priority? So if there's anything you take from this call, it's that there are a lot of things happening right now. My sense is the Biden administration doesn't need pressure. They don't need to be lit up by calls from members of Congress or donors. What needs to happen is outside of the administration, of just keeping this issue in play in the media, in the political sphere, and just among the community at large. Let me stop there, Haley. I'm happy to provide more details on what's happening in Washington for the hostages, but back to you.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I also had the opportunity after the march to hear from Rachel about their experience. It is so gut-wrenching to think, and this is 240 families that don't know the fate of their loved ones now for 40 days. 40 days. And we are going to do everything we can to make sure this is front and center for our members of Congress and for policymakers. In addition to that, we've had a question regarding something else for Congress. Carrie says, what can we do to make sure politicians follow through on their support of Israel, meaning passing supplemental funding packages to support Israel? Because even though they were speaking eloquently about supporting Israel, there was no money for Israel or Ukraine in the package to keep the government running. Carrie, you're absolutely right. President Biden, just days after the horrific attacks on October 7th, he pledged $14.3 billion in supplemental funding, an unprecedented amount for Israel. This is very important assistance that will help to replenish the Iron Dome interceptors and other life-saving assistance that Israel needs. The House, under the new speaker, they voted on a funding bill 2 weeks ago. It did not, it had the money, but they had added an unnecessary, what's called offset, they added a requirement that $14.3 billion be cut elsewhere. It wasn't needed. You don't need to do that with emergency aid, yet they had politicized this moment. Now there's still an effort, because come Friday, the government will shut down without a spending bill. There is an effort to fund the government, of course, and it doesn't include this emergency assistance that is so badly needed for Israel and other allies, including Ukraine. So what to do next? Well, we also have a call to action for Congress on that matter, urging Congress to fulfill President Biden's request for this $14.3 billion. You can write to your member of Congress using our call to action, which is posted in the chat. Keep in mind, even though we're a Democratic organization, we encourage you to write to all members of Congress. We have your member of Congress, whether they're a Democrat or Republican, should hear from you on this matter. And Daniel, since you worked in the House for so long, I don't know if you want to comment about both what Republicans have already done, but what you think the path forward is with this aid.
Sure. I can just provide the anecdotal sense of apoplexy that both my former colleagues who work on these issues in the House experienced, and that outside experts like myself and you, Haley, how we reacted to Speaker Johnson's first move being a grossly political stunt. It was so abhorrent to those who have worked for years to build consensus, bipartisan consensus on Israel-related matters. And I think another angle here is where people on this call can be helpful. I think is actually coming out swinging from a partisan perspective, continuing to highlight the absurdity of Republicans claiming to be pro-Israel and yet playing games like this. What I think ultimately happens is we get the CR done. That's the number one priority of everyone. And then the key is getting the Senate to pass the Ukraine-Israel supplemental, because the House's gimmick was a non-starter in the Senate. The Senate here is going to play its role as the responsible, more mature actor, remarkable given all the dynamics we're seeing there. But in this case, it's true. They're going to pass a Ukraine-Israel supplemental. It'll go to the House and they'll jam the House with it, because there's going to be no other option at that point. So I perhaps naively, but I'd like to think in the next week plus, we are going to have an Israel supplemental done.
I hope so. And we'll also say that it does include about $100 million in humanitarian aid for innocent Palestinians. And let's face it, there was a humanitarian crisis in Gaza before October 7th. Of course, the war has exacerbated what was already a very difficult humanitarian situation in Gaza, and that aid should go to innocent Palestinians. I know the Biden administration is doing everything it can to ensure that water and food and medical assistance is getting into Gaza. It's Hamas that has put its command and control center underneath the largest hospital in Gaza. It's Hamas that has diverted emergency assistance. So this is an extremely, extremely challenging effort, but the Congress should include the 100 million for the innocent Palestinians as well. Carol has asked about, oh, sorry, Daniel, did you want to mention?
I was just going to mention one other thing, which it's important to understand what is in this $14.3 billion package. It's not only the money and the replenishment of Iron Dome and missiles. It also, courtesy of really important voices at the State Department, it also includes a number of authorities, which is rare for a supplemental. It includes authorities that would allow the expedited shipping of weapons to Israel and allow Israel to tap into existing U.S. stockpiles, which are stored in Israel. And in moments like this, for Israel to be able to draw upon what's in those stockpiles to make sure that its troops in Gaza have what they need. So I mentioned that for when people are advocating, to say this isn't just about money, it's literally getting weapons into the hands of the IDF that needs it immediately.
Great. We have gotten quite a few questions about where was President Biden and Vice President Harris yesterday. I will just say, I think they were in California, but they were never slated to be there. This march was really about the community and community leaders. The decision was made to have the representatives, both Democrats and Republican leaders from the Senate and the House. And that was that in terms of government representatives from the United States, of course. You heard from a few members of Congress, I think Richie Torres as well earlier. But they were not slated to be there, though I know they were incredibly supportive of the effort. On a related note, we have a question about how you would gauge the support from President Biden of Israel. And I would say this has been a remarkable moment where, you know, one of the things a lot of people talk about, you know, the president's age, of course. This is something that we can say unequivocally. No one has a longer record of support of Israel than Joe Biden. Since he was elected to the Senate in 1972, he has been a supporter, not just of Israel, but of its security and its right to self-defense. He understands these issues more than perhaps anyone who's ever set foot in that White House. And as someone who was in the room with him in the aftermath of this horrific attack on October 11th, when he spoke to Jewish community leaders, I can tell you it's not just his words, it is the emotion with which they are delivered, and it is also the actions that he takes in support of Israel and our community. He's been remarkable in this moment. He said on that day, I have your back, meaning the Jewish people and Israel. It's not just been the support of Israel and its right to self-defense, but also the right that we all have as Jews to live in this country without fear of hate. He's following very closely the rise of anti-Semitism. He came out with an unprecedented first ever strategy to combat anti-Semitism earlier this year. And in the aftermath of October 7th, the White House has taken steps across the government to strengthen those measures, including on college campuses. So I would say the president has been remarkable, which is what has elicited praise of how he has done amid this crisis, not just from Democrats, but from Republicans as well. For those who haven't followed, our counterpart, the Republican Jewish Coalition, which has never said anything nice about Democrats, praised President Biden and his support of Israel in this crisis, as they should. And of course, you've seen, by contrast, President Trump on that same day, on October 11th, mocking Israel's leadership and praising a terrorist organization, which we featured in our first ad. Daniel, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that in terms of the president's record on this issue. I don't know how it could be any stronger.
I think that's exactly right. I just want to make 2 points. One, Haley, I actually want to praise you and JDCA here, that if you think about what people can do with Biden, I think the number one message is thank you, and building a broad coalition of people who are amplifying that message that what Biden is doing is right. And JDCA was remarkably effective behind the scenes. And this is where I think JDCA plays such a key role, behind the scenes of getting a lot of former Biden and Obama officials to go on record thanking the president for the position he is taking, because it could have been just as easy for former officials to break into the kinds of squabbles that we're seeing right now in the House of Representatives. And I think with JDCA's leadership and others, the message really should be just thank you, President Biden. There is a moment where people want to pressure the administration and pressure the Qataris and Turks and others. I don't think that moment is right now. I think that would actually be counterproductive in all of those cases. Thanks.
Absolutely. And we have another question related to Vice President Harris's support of Israel. And I would just say that since it was announced that she was going to be Joe Biden's running mate in August of 2020, she's been a part of this team. I traveled to Israel with her in 2017 when I was her Senate aide. I can tell you that her support of Israel is unequivocal. She has stood by Israel. In that trip, we went to visit Iron Dome interceptors so she could understand just the kind of threats that Israel was facing. She absolutely has demonstrated the same degree of leadership just alongside President Biden. And we are equally grateful for her support at this time. And she's been working the phones as well, right alongside the president, ensuring Israel that we have their back. And of course, Second Gentleman Emha, a historic, her partner, but also our partner, the first ever Jewish spouse of a president or vice president who really took a leadership role with Ambassador Lipstadt on the historic efforts to combat anti-Semitism and the strategy I mentioned earlier. So between the president, the vice president, and the whole White House, the staff, Secretary Blinken, there has been remarkable support for Israel and our community, and we're grateful.
And I would just very briefly add to that, Haley, that in my mind, there are 5 officials who matter right now besides the president on everything related to Israel. It's Jake Sullivan, John Feiner, Brett McGurk, Tony Blinken, and Phil Gordon, who is the National Security Advisor to Kamala Harris. He is in every single meeting that they are doing. The vice president is actively hands-on. She's not the public face of the administration's efforts on this. That's the president, but I think that there's a reason for that. And also, someone just texted, John Kirby has really been a rock star as well. 100% agree. He's not in the room necessarily on all the policy issues, but there's a strong team here.
Great. Well, I'm sorry we weren't able to get to every question in the chat, but thank you. We tried to consolidate as many as possible. Thank all of you for joining us, and over to Bobby to let us know what's coming up. We are going to miss next week due to the holiday, but in light of Thanksgiving coming, I'll just say we're grateful for all of you. We're grateful for this community. And while we're missing 1 week, we're going to be back the week after. And we'll hear from Bobby about who we will hear from next. Bobby, over to you.
Thanks, Haley, and thanks to everyone for joining today's Jewish Democratic Council of America's 6th community briefing on the crisis in Israel to talk about the March for Israel rally yesterday in Washington, D.C. I'm Bobby Saferstein, JDCA Senior Director of Programming and Public Engagement, and it really was profoundly meaningful to see so many people in attendance yesterday, which truly was a cross-section of American Jewry. To learn about all the ways you can be a part of JDCA, including attending these briefings, please visit jewishdems.org. There you can also learn about joining our JDCA membership program and how you can volunteer with one of our state and local JDCA chapter and affiliates around the country. This week, JDCA continues to rally for a week of action. So following yesterday's powerful march, we urge everyone to continue showing their support for Israel, continue demanding the release of the hostages in Gaza, and continuing to combat and call out anti-Semitism wherever you see it. First, to join our call for action demanding the release of the hostages, please click on the link in the chat. Releasing the hostages, or Pidyon Shvuyim, is one of the greatest responsibilities that we are called upon to do. In fact, in Judaism, it's not just a mitzvah, it's referred to as a mitzvah rabbah, or a great mitzvah. It's that important. So please, to join JDCA in demanding the release of the hostages, please click on that link. It's time to bring them home now. Second, as Haley mentioned earlier, you can sign our online call to action urging your representatives and senators to fulfill President Biden's commitment for requesting additional aid to Israel, Ukraine, and additional humanitarian aid for everyone. We must make our voices heard and advocate for this critical funding. So please click on the link in the chat. Third, please join us in thanking President Biden, Democratic leadership, and Democratic senators for standing with Israel throughout. President Biden's leadership in the face of this conflict has been remarkable, and leaders of the Democratic Party have been united in their strong and unwavering support for Israel. You can email your senators to thank them for their support through the link in the chat. And finally, as Haley just mentioned, please join our next community briefing on Wednesday, November 29th. While we're taking a break next week for Thanksgiving, we will be back at noon on the 29th and will welcome Congressman and former House Democratic Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. You can sign up for the link in the chat. As we conclude today's program, we continue to pray for an end to the war in Israel and Gaza, and for a new age of peace and prosperity for Israel, the Palestinian people, and for Jews around the world. Please join me in saying the blessing for the swift and speedy release of the hostages by saying Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Matir Asurim. Stay strong, stay hopeful, stay engaged, and thank you for joining us. An early Shabbat Shalom, happy Thanksgiving, and see you on the 29th. Take care.